Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network. This is our special Sunday edition called Survive and Thrive with Dennae. Your host, Dennae Handford, will dive deep into chapter-by-chapter discussions on specifically selected books to help you make better decisions as an entrepreneur. Visit toughdecisions.net to sign up for our free weekly entrepreneur email. Before we get started, let's hear from one of our sponsors. Have you ever thought about investing in real estate, but find yourself so busy that you don't have time for it? Do you have FOMO, which is the fear of missing out? At HandfordCapital.com, we help investors with passive real estate investments that project better returns than traditional investment vehicles such as the stock market. If you'd like to find out more about our passive real estate investments, visit HandfordCapital.com. That's HANDFORD capital.com. We will jump on a call with you to discuss your investment goals and to see if our investments are a good fit for you. This advertisement is not to be construed as an offer or recommendation to buy or sell a security. Visit HandfordCapital.com.
Thank you for joining me today for our Survive and Thrive. We are currently discussing our way through the book called Thrive, written by Arianna Huffington. And she is making the case in this book that we need to redefine success to not only be the achievement of money and not only be the achievement of power, but also what she calls the third metric. And interestingly enough, the third metric is not just one word or one thing that really defines it, but it's made up of 4 different aspects as she sees it. And we've been discussing what those 4 aspects were. We started off with well-being, personal well-being, physical well-being. We talked about wisdom and the choices that we make as far as how we spend our time and our energy that we have. We talked about wonder last week, and now today we're going to spend just a little bit of time talking about the final aspect of the third metric, which is giving. And each of these aspects of the third metric are important, but I do think that recognizing that the third metric would be incomplete without this giving aspect. And essentially, we're talking here about what we do to give back to people and culture and society, and how we use our talents and our abilities and our time to give to others. Most notably, we give when we don't expect anything in return. A lot of times we give, but we know that what we're giving is going to return us something. And so we have to stop and ask, is that really giving or is that an investment? And I think sometimes it can be both, and it's okay. I don't think that it's wrong to give when we know that either, immediately or down the road, we're going to get something in return. But giving when we don't expect anything, and giving when we know that the person or the group that we're giving to can't really give us anything in return, that is the most rewarding in the way that we're going to discuss today. Now, it has been known for a long, long, long time that giving is very, very important for our happiness and our sense of well-being. Going back as long as the early philosophers, Seneca said, "No one can live happily who has regard for himself alone and transforms everything into a question of his own utility." So giving credence to the idea of we can't be truly happy and just do things that are for our own good and for our own self-improvement. No one can live happily who has regard for himself alone. And yet, as people, as human beings, we tend to be very selfish individuals, and we are constantly looking out for ourselves. And part of that is inborn into us. We're naturally selfish, self-centered people. But I do also think that our culture plays a large role in encouraging this. And so in that way, we're also fighting against the current of culture. Some encouraging words for you in regard to this, that a 2012 study by the University of Wisconsin demonstrated that giving and compassion and empathy that causes us to give to other people is actually a trainable skill. It's not a stable trait. It's a trainable skill. And that's encouraging because we've all met people that are better at us giving than maybe we are, or maybe people who are naturally givers. And those are wonderful people to have in our lives. And they're wonderful people to have around for emulation purposes. But for people who may not be as naturally good at taking note of what needs to be done and taking note of needs and then meeting those needs. It's encouraging to know that this is something that we can train ourselves to get better at and to be better at. And I think it's also interesting to think about the impact this has on our families and our children, because this really starts in the family unit, and this is something that our children need to see us doing. We need to train our children to be better at this and to be good at this. Our children, our spouse should see us giving. I think that they should see us giving to them. We're constantly asking our children to do things, and to help with this and do that. But I think it's important that they see us serving them. I think it's important that they see us serving our spouse, and that our spouse sees us serving our children and them, because that is part of what binds us together as a family. We'll talk a little bit shortly about the oxytocin again, and how the oxytocin is produced when we give to others, and that's what forms a bond. And so if we want to have strong bonds and ties with our family, then we need to give to them. We need to serve them. But the best way to teach our children to do this is to involve them in our giving, and for us to all do it together. And so I think that also is a valuable thing to be involved in. Now, the great thing about service is that the benefits go both ways. And that's why Huffington has included it here in the third metric, because remember, we're talking about, success as an individual and creating this third measure of success. It's not just money that we achieve for ourselves. It's not just power that we achieve for ourselves, but there's this third metric, this third measurement of personal success. And we've talked about well-being and wisdom and wonder and now giving. And giving improves the state of the people in the group that we give to, but it also improves our own personal state. When we are striving to get things for ourselves, no matter what it is, we are operating out of this perceived deficit or this perceived place of need. And there's nothing wrong with that. Much of what we do is geared towards getting something or producing something or creating something to meet a need. And so whenever we're out there and we're working and we're trying to get things, we're operating out of this place of need. But when we give, no matter what amount it is or no matter what capacity it might be, we're operating from a place of abundance, or we're operating from a place of extra that we have that we can give to someone else. And that always allows us to practice gratitude and be fulfilled, even in the midst of our drive to improve and succeed at these other things. So it's really important that as entrepreneurs, as corporate leaders, that we're able to do both, that we're able to see the needs that exist and go out and do things and get things and create things to meet those needs. But it's also important for us to be able to operate out of this place of abundance, which happens when we give, because that allows us to be grateful for what we have and to be thankful and to be fulfilled even while we're trying to get these other things. I think one of the saddest scenarios to me in the whole world is people who are very, very successful in certain realms, but yet they're not satisfied, they're not content with what they currently have. And I think that's because a lot of times this aspect of giving and serving others is left out. Now, we've talked before about oxytocin and cortisol and some of those other happy chemicals, if you will. We talked about that in our last book a great deal. But science supports this idea that giving to others, whether it's time, energy, talent, money, whatever it is, giving to others actually makes us happier. One thing I do want to mention here before we start talking about some of these scientific studies is that do keep in mind that measures of happiness and well-being are pretty much all subjective. But through these scientific studies, we found that people's self-reported levels of happiness and well-being across the board pretty much were increased once they started giving. So just to mention a couple of specific things, one scientific study found that volunteering once a week led to an improvement in the sense of well-being equal to that as might be achieved through a salary increase of $20,000 to $75,000. So a lot of times when we think, well, if I just had a little bit more money, then I would be, able to be comfortable, and that would make me happy, or I'd be able to relax and enjoy my life. What they found that was volunteering once a week can do the same thing for you. Another study found that donating to charity led to an increase of well-being equal to that of doubling the household income. That's amazing to stop and think about. Again, many people get caught in the trap of, well, if I just made a little bit more money. What about if you made double the current money? Do you think that would make you happy? How possible or how achievable is that? Maybe it's very achievable. Maybe it's not. But you can achieve the same improvements in your sense of well-being and happiness by donating to charity. That's what the science shows. University of North Carolina and UCLA did a combined study that showed that students whose happiness indicators were mostly hedonic, meaning they were mostly centered on themselves and their enjoyment of their life, had high levels of biological markers related to raised levels of inflammation. And current medical research shows a strong correlation between high levels of inflammation and serious illnesses such as diabetes, cancer, and others. So the happiness indicators related that were mostly hedonic, those students had higher levels of inflammation, which can lead to serious health issues. And then finally, several combined studies, I'll just kind of summarize them here. Volunteering led to longer lives, lower rates of depression, and higher reports of well-being. So the science supports this, and personal experience, if you've ever had the opportunity, probably supports this as well. So then we're left with the question of, as entrepreneurs and corporate leaders, how can we encourage this? Well, Huffington, as you probably remember and may just recognize the name, she's the head of the Huffington Post, started the Huffington Post. She actually does things within her corporation to encourage volunteering. She allows employees a certain number of days off each year, paid days off to volunteer. Her corporation also sponsors joint volunteering projects. And she also is able to match certain donations made by employees to their causes, and she gives money to those causes. We have done in our office some similar things where we did group projects. In the fall, we usually do a food drive, and we've involved our patients, we've involved our staff. We have a good time with it, but we also are giving. And it's been fun to see, the staff and the patients work together to achieve the goals that we set through that. And I think it's done a lot to encourage our staff to give, but also, improve the morale and create a fun, enjoyable work environment. How do we become better givers? Well, I think the key, as we've talked about before, is to implement small changes every day. A couple of ideas. Try to make a personal connection with someone that normally you wouldn't. For example, you're standing in line to check out at a department store. Can you talk to someone? Can you encourage someone? Can you give them a smile? Can you make a personal connection where you haven't done before? Maybe you're ordering your coffee at the coffee house, and it's just a matter of genuinely asking someone how their day was or how they are. That can go a long way. Or another idea, use a skill or a talent that you have, something that you're particularly good at, to give and meet a need for someone else. Maybe it's an accounting ability. Maybe it's cooking. I have a friend that, I wouldn't call her a gourmet cook, but she enjoys cooking and she enjoys making meals for people. And she has taken it on as her personal mission to make sure that, new moms and people going through periods of grief, she makes them meals and she sees to it that they have what they need. And that's just such an encouraging thing. And she and her family, they're not wealthy by any means. Like I said, she's not a gourmet chef, but that's something that she has and she can share with someone else. And so she does. To kind of close out our thoughts on giving, I wanted to share with you a quote by Howard Schultz, who's the CEO of Starbucks. And I share this because I think as corporate leaders, as entrepreneurs, as the heads of businesses and companies who either are already profitable or will be profitable in the near future, that we have a responsibility to lead the way. And he said, profitability is a shallow goal if it doesn't have a greater purpose behind it. So if you do have a purpose behind your profitability, good for you. I want to encourage you to continue to chase those goals and to share those goals and that vision with others. If you don't, and if profitability is your sole goal right now, then I want to challenge you to get a greater purpose behind it. There's nothing wrong with being profitable. There's nothing wrong with making money. That's how business is, and that's how our country runs, is on people who are profitable and can share that, but get a greater purpose behind it. What is that purpose that you have in being profitable? And then share that, share your vision, and get people on board with that vision so that you can achieve those goals. That wraps up our discussion of the book Thrive, the third metric to redefining success and creating a life of well-being, wisdom, and wonder. That's the title of the book that we've been discussing. As we conclude, I wanted you to consider a quote by a man named David Foster Wallace. I had not heard this quote. I was not honestly even familiar with this individual until recently, but the quote goes like this: "Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what? To worship." His conclusion was that we should choose very carefully about what we choose to worship, because pretty much anything you worship will eat you alive. And he was specifically referring to things other than a spiritual God that we choose to worship. Pretty much everything else you worship will eat you alive. And I think he's really onto something. I think I agree with him on pretty much every aspect of that quote. If we worship money, we'll never feel like abundant. We'll never feel like we have enough. If we worship power, there's never enough of that. If we worship a busy schedule and filling up our time with activity all the time, we're always going to live in what Huffington referred to as a time famine. We're always going to feel frazzled and stressed. So what have we come to as the conclusion and the way to proceed? Well, we need to do some reflection, and we need to look inward, if you will. And I want to be careful, because I think looking inward can very easily turn into a worship of self. And I don't think that's the solution at all. But we do need to take some time to reflect, and we need to let God himself instruct us on what's really eternally valuable, so that then we can order our schedule and our time and our money and our energy that we have in limited amounts. We can order that, and we can use that in a way that puts what he declares should be our priorities at the top. And so that's the way to thrive in this third metric, is by having the same priorities and valuing the same things that our Creator values. And then we will be on the same page, and we can truly, truly be successful. Not overnight. We're not going to all of a sudden be successful tomorrow, but it will allow us to strive in the right way and strive for the right things, and thus over time feel fulfilled and happy and successful, because we know we're spending our lives the right way. Huffington does mention there at the end that we have roughly 30,000 days to enjoy life. And so how we spend those days, which we know are going to be limited, is so, so important. And then we want to spend those days in a way that invests in eternity, because then we will have that to take with us, and we will be truly, truly successful at that point. Thanks for joining me on Survive and Thrive. Next week, we'll be starting a new book, and I'm looking forward to, as always, diving into some new ideas and learning from them and improving the way that we make decisions in our life.
Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email, where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.